I knew something was wrong the moment I saw Sandra Patterson storming across my front lawn at 7 in the morning, her face the color of a ripe tomato and her finger already pointed at me like a loaded weapon. "Thomas Harrison, we need to talk right now," she shrieked, her voice piercing through the peaceful Saturday morning like nails on a chalkboard. I had been enjoying my coffee on the porch of my newly purchased home in Riverside Estates, a planned community just outside of Sacramento, California, admiring the beautiful old oak trees that dotted my property. I set down my mug slowly, already bracing myself. Sandra was the HOA president, a position she wore like a crown of thorns, wielding it against anyone who dared to breathe wrong in her vicinity. She was 53, drove a white Mercedes SUV with a "Live, Laugh, Love" bumper sticker, and had that particular haircut that screamed, "I demand to speak to the manager," from 3 blocks away. "Good morning, Sandra," I said calmly, refusing to let her aggressive approach ruin my day. "What seems to be the problem? The problem? The problem?" Her voice went up an octave. "Your trees are dropping leaves all over my yard. I spent 3 hours yesterday raking, and this morning there are more leaves everywhere. This is unacceptable. You need to cut down those trees immediately." I blinked at her, genuinely confused. "Cut down the trees? Sandra, it's October. Trees lose their leaves. That's what they do. I don't care what time of year it is. Those trees are a nuisance, and according to HOA regulations, you are responsible for maintaining your property in a way that doesn't negatively impact your neighbors." She thrust a sheaf of papers at me, which I recognized as the HOA covenant that had come with my purchase. I had read that document cover to cover before buying this house. In fact, I had read it 3 times because I was an environmental lawyer by profession, and I knew exactly how important these details could be. The house had been a steal, and now I was beginning to understand why the previous owner had moved out so quickly. "Sandra, I've read the covenants. There's nothing in there about removing healthy trees, especially not mature oaks that are probably 70 or 80 years old." I kept my voice level and professional. "Well, there should be," she snapped. "And as HOA president, I'm issuing you a formal warning. If you don't do something about those trees within 30 days, you'll be fined $500 per week until compliance is achieved." "Those trees are protected by California law," I said, my lawyer brain kicking into gear. "You can't just demand someone remove heritage oaks without proper permits and justification, and even then, it's nearly impossible. I can do whatever I want. I'm the HOA president." Sandra's face was getting even redder now, if that was possible. "And if you don't comply, I'll make your life here a living hell." She spun on her heel and marched back toward her house, which sat directly behind mine. That's when I noticed something interesting. Her yard was indeed covered in oak leaves, the beautiful golden brown leaves that came from the massive oaks on my property. But looking at the property line, something didn't quite add up. After Sandra disappeared into her house, slamming the door hard enough that I heard it from my porch, I went inside and pulled out the survey that had been done during my home purchase. I spread it across my dining room table and studied it carefully. My property was larger than I had initially realized. The lot was almost 2 acres, which was substantial for this area. The previous owner, an elderly gentleman named Robert Chen, had lived here since the development was built in 1962. He had been one of the original homeowners, back when Riverside Estates was just farmland being converted into suburban housing. According to the survey, my property line extended much further back than I had thought. In fact, if I was reading this correctly, the property line went well past where I had assumed it was, extending nearly to the back of Sandra's house. I needed to verify this in person. I grabbed my copy of the survey, a measuring tape, and went outside. The day was warming up nicely, and several of my neighbors were out doing yard work. I waved to a few of them, noting the sympathetic looks some of them gave me. Apparently, everyone knew what it was like to be on Sandra's bad side. I started at the survey marker at the front corner of my property and began following the boundary lines as indicated on the survey. When I reached the side of my house, I found another survey marker embedded in the ground, exactly where the survey said it should be. I kept going, measuring as I went. The property line ran straight back, parallel to my house, and then angled slightly toward the east. As I followed it, my suspicion began to solidify into certainty. The property line didn't stop where the grass ended and the trees began. It went right through the grove of oak trees and continued almost to Sandra's back fence. Every single oak tree was on my property. Every single one. Moreover, Sandra's house sat on what appeared to be a much smaller lot than mine, probably only about half an acre. The trees I was supposedly meant to remove weren't just on my property. They were nowhere near hers. The leaves were simply doing what leaves do, traveling on the wind and landing wherever gravity and air currents took them. I pulled out my phone and took extensive photos of the survey markers, the trees, and the measurements I had made. Then I went back inside and did something I probably should have done before now. I went to the Sacramento County Assessor's website and pulled up the official property records for both my address and Sandra's. The records confirmed what the survey had shown. My lot was 1.87 acres. Sandra's lot was 0.43 acres. The property line was exactly where my survey indicated. Furthermore, the trees were specifically mentioned in my property deed as heritage oaks, protected under California Public Resources Code Section 21083.4. I sat back in my chair, a slow smile spreading across my face. Sandra had just demanded that I remove trees that were not only entirely on my property, but were also legally protected by state law. Trees that she had absolutely no claim to whatsoever. The following Tuesday, I received a formal letter from the HOA. It was signed by Sandra Patterson, president, and countersigned by two other board members, Bethany Morrison and Carol Hughes. The letter reiterated Sandra's demands, stated that I was in violation of Section 4.7 of the HOA covenants regarding nuisance vegetation, and informed me that if I did not submit a plan for tree removal within 14 days, I would be fined. I read Section 4.7 of the covenants again. It stated that homeowners must maintain their yards free of dead, diseased, or dangerous vegetation that poses a threat to neighboring properties. The oaks were none of those things. They were healthy, beautiful, and had been there for longer than the HOA had existed. I drafted a response letter, professional and concise. I explained that the trees in question were entirely on my property, were protected by state law, and did not fall under any violation described in the HOA covenants. I included copies of my survey, the property records, and the relevant sections of California law. I sent it certified mail to Sandra's address and to the HOA's registered agent. 3 days later, Sandra showed up at my door again. This time she had Bethany Morrison with her, a thin woman in her late 40s who looked like she would rather be anywhere else. "Your letter changes nothing," Sandra announced without preamble. "The HOA board has voted and you are in violation. You have 11 days left to submit your compliance plan." "Sandra, did you read what I sent you? The trees are on my property. They're protected by law. You have no authority to demand their removal." I kept my tone patient, though my patience was wearing thin. The leaves are falling on HOA common areas and on other residents' properties. That makes them a nuisance, Sandra insisted. What common areas? There are no common areas behind my house, and leaves falling into a neighbor's yard isn't a violation of anything. It's nature. I looked at Bethany. Do you understand that what she's demanding is illegal? Bethany shifted uncomfortably. Well, I mean, the leaves are kind of a lot. They're leaves, from trees, in autumn. This is literally how trees work, I said, my frustration starting to show. And more importantly, they're my trees on my property, and you have zero legal standing to demand anything regarding them. We'll see about that, Sandra snapped. The fine will start accruing next Monday if you don't comply. After they left, I called my colleague, Marcus Chen, who specialized in property law. After I explained the situation, he laughed so hard I had to hold the phone away from my ear. Let me get this straight, he said, still chuckling. The HOA president is demanding you remove protected oak trees that are entirely on your property because leaves are falling into her yard. That's exactly the situation. Thomas, this is the dumbest thing I've heard all year, and I once had a client who tried to claim adverse possession of a Walmart parking lot. Marcus paused. Do you want me to draft a cease and desist letter? Because this is going to go badly for them if they keep pushing. Not yet. Let's see if they actually try to fine me first. I want to see how far they're willing to take this. Your funeral, man. But when this blows up in their faces, I want to hear all about it. Monday came and went. On Tuesday, I received another letter from the HOA. This one informed me that I was being fined $500 for failure to comply with the tree removal order. The fine would continue weekly until I achieved compliance. I had been expecting this, but seeing it in writing still made my blood pressure rise. These people were actually going to try to extort money from me for refusing to commit what would essentially be an environmental crime. I called Marcus back. Draft the cease and desist, and let's prepare for litigation because I don't think Sandra is going to back down. On it. This is going to be fun. The cease and desist letter was delivered on Thursday. It outlined in excruciating legal detail why the HOA's demands were not only inappropriate but illegal. It cited property law, environmental law, and the specific protections afforded to heritage oaks in California. It demanded that the HOA immediately rescind the fines and issue a written apology. It gave them 7 days to comply. Sandra's response was to increase the fines to $750 per week and to issue a lien notice on my property. That was a mistake. A big one. You see, in California, HOAs have to follow very specific procedures when placing liens on properties. They have to provide proper notice, hold hearings, and give homeowners the opportunity to dispute the charges before a neutral third party. Sandra had done none of these things. She had simply decided she had the authority to place a lien and had done it. I immediately filed a lawsuit in Sacramento County Superior Court. I sued the HOA, Sandra Patterson personally, and the other board members for harassment, abuse of process, and slander of title. The slander of title charge was particularly important because Sandra had placed a lien on my property without legal justification, which could affect my ability to sell or refinance. The lawsuit got Sandra's attention. I received a phone call from her within hours of the lawsuit being served. Her voice was shrill and angry. How dare you sue the HOA? We're just trying to maintain property values. By illegally demanding I remove protected trees that are on my property. By placing an unlawful lien on my house. Sandra, you've broken multiple laws here. You had every opportunity to back down and you chose not to. I was done being polite. Those trees are a menace. My yard is constantly covered in leaves. Then rake them. That's what normal people do. You don't get to demand that someone else destroy their property because you don't like doing yard work. I'll fight you on this. The HOA has insurance for legal matters and our lawyer is very good. Great. I look forward to depositions. By the way, when exactly did the HOA board vote to approve these fines? Because according to your own bylaws, you need a quorum of the board for any enforcement action, and I'd love to see the minutes from that meeting. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Sandra hung up. The truth was, I wasn't sure if there had ever been a proper board meeting. From what I had observed, Sandra seemed to run the HOA like her personal fiefdom, making decisions unilaterally and expecting everyone to fall in line. But HOAs are corporations, and corporations have rules about how decisions are made. I filed a request under California Civil Code Section 5200, which gives homeowners the right to inspect HOA records. I asked for all board meeting minutes from the past year, all financial records, and all enforcement actions taken against any homeowner. The HOA had 30 days to comply. They didn't. That gave me grounds to add another claim to my lawsuit: failure to provide access to HOA records. The penalties for this could be substantial, including my attorney's fees and up to $500 in statutory damages. While this was going on, something interesting started happening in the neighborhood. Other homeowners began approaching me quietly at first to share their own stories about Sandra and the HOA. My next-door neighbor, James Martinez, told me that Sandra had once tried to fine him because his house was painted the wrong shade of beige. The approved color and the color he had used were so similar that you literally couldn't tell them apart without a paint chip. But Sandra had insisted they were different and had levied a $200 fine. Another neighbor, Patricia Wung, said that Sandra had tried to force her to remove a vegetable garden from her backyard, claiming it violated the covenant's landscaping requirements, even though the covenant said nothing about vegetable gardens and Patricia's backyard was completely fenced and not visible from the street. A retired couple, the Hendersons, told me that Sandra had attempted to fine them for parking their RV in their own driveway for more than 48 hours, even though they had a side yard that was specifically designed for RV parking and the covenants explicitly allowed it. The pattern was clear. Sandra had been abusing her position as HOA president for years, making up violations and issuing fines based on her personal preferences rather than any actual rule violations. The reason she had gotten away with it for so long was that most people found it easier to just pay the fines or comply with her demands rather than fight back. But I was a lawyer, and I didn't respond well to bullies. The preliminary hearing for my lawsuit was scheduled for early December. In the meantime, I continued to document everything. Every leaf that fell, every communication from Sandra, every interaction with other board members. I set up security cameras around my property to ensure I had video evidence of everything that happened. In mid-November, Sandra tried a new tactic. She organized what she called a neighborhood beautification day and sent out a mass email to all residents of Riverside Estates. The email claimed that my neglected trees were causing problems for the entire community, and that concerned residents should contact the HOA board to express their support for the tree removal initiative. This backfired spectacularly. Instead of rallying support against me, the email prompted several homeowners to start asking questions about HOA finances, enforcement procedures, and Sandra's authority to make unilateral decisions. A group of about 15 residents requested a special meeting to discuss HOA governance. Sandra tried to deny the request, but California law is clear. If homeowners representing at least 5% of the voting power request a meeting, the board must hold one within 30 days. Riverside Estates had 112 homes, so 15 homeowners were well over the 5% threshold. The meeting was scheduled for the first Tuesday in December, 2 days before my court hearing. I attended the meeting with Marcus at my side. The community clubhouse was packed, with at least 60 homeowners present. Sandra sat at the front table with Bethany Morrison and Carol Hughes, looking like she had bitten into a lemon. The meeting started with Sandra trying to control the narrative. We're here because some residents have questions about HOA procedures. I want to assure everyone that the board always operates in the best interests of the community. Then, why did you place an illegal lien on Thomas Harrison's property? Called out James Martinez from the back of the room. Sandra's face flushed. That lien is perfectly legal. Mr. Harrison is in violation of HOA covenants and refused to comply with enforcement actions. Marcus stood up. I'm Marcus Chen, Mr. Harrison's attorney. The lien is not legal because it was placed without following proper procedures under California law. The underlying fines are not legal because they're based on demands that the HOA has no authority to make. And the enforcement action itself is not legal because it violates state environmental protections for heritage oak trees. The trees are a nuisance, Sandra insisted. Trees dropping leaves in autumn is not a nuisance under any legal definition, Marcus continued. And even if it were, the trees are entirely on Mr. Harrison's property. The HOA has no jurisdiction over them. Patricia Wung raised her hand. Sandra, I received a copy of the survey that Thomas sent to the HOA. Those trees are clearly on his property. Why are you trying to force him to remove them? Because the leaves fall on my property, Sandra snapped, apparently forgetting that she was supposed to be representing the interests of the entire HOA, not just her personal grievances. The room erupted in murmurs. Several people started talking at once. Wait, this is just about leaves in your yard, someone called out. You're wasting HOA money on a lawsuit over leaves. Another voice added. Carol Hughes, who had been silent until now, cleared her throat. Sandra, maybe we should discuss this with the board before. There's nothing to discuss. I am the president and I make the decisions about enforcement. Sandra's voice was rising and I could see her losing control of the room. That's not how HOAs work, said David Henderson, the retired gentleman who had told me about his RV troubles. The board makes decisions collectively, not the president alone. I'd like to see the minutes from the board meeting where you voted to fine Mr. Harrison, James Martinez said. Could you provide those? Sandra's face went from red to pale. The minutes are. They're available for review during business hours. Actually, they're not, I said, standing up. I requested them 6 weeks ago under Civil Code Section 5200 and you never provided them. I'm going to guess that's because there was no board meeting. You just decided on your own to issue the fines and place the lien, didn't you, Sandra? The room went silent. Everyone was staring at Sandra, waiting for her answer. The board discussed it informally. She stammered. Informal discussions don't count, Marcus said. Under California law and your own bylaws, enforcement actions require a vote at a properly noticed board meeting. Did that happen? Sandra didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her silence was answer enough. Bethany Morrison looked at Sandra with something like horror dawning on her face. Sandra, you told me we had voted on this. You sent me an email asking me to countersign the letter, and you said the board had already approved it. Me too, Carol Hughes added quietly. You said it was just a formality, that we had already discussed it at the October meeting. We did discuss it, Sandra insisted. We discussed leaves being a problem in the neighborhood generally, Bethany said, her voice getting stronger. We never voted to fine anyone. We certainly never voted to place a lien on anyone's property. The meeting devolved into chaos after that. Multiple homeowners stood up to share their own stories of questionable fines and enforcement actions. It became clear that Sandra had been running the HOA like her personal enforcement agency for years, and no one had challenged her until now. At the end of the meeting, a motion was made to hold an emergency election for a new HOA board. The motion passed with only 3 dissenting votes, one of which was Sandra's. The election was scheduled for 2 weeks later. The court hearing 2 days later was almost anticlimactic. The HOA's lawyer, a tired-looking man in his 60s named Robert Paulson, basically admitted that the enforcement action had been improper. Your Honor, it appears there were some procedural irregularities in how this matter was handled, he said diplomatically. The HOA is prepared to remove the lien and rescind the fines. Procedural irregularities. Judge Michelle Torres looked unimpressed. Counselor, your client placed a lien on a property without legal authority, demanded the removal of protected trees without jurisdiction, and failed to follow basic corporate governance procedures. That's not a procedural irregularity. That's a pattern of unlawful conduct. Yes, Your Honor. The board has been reorganizing in light of recent revelations. The judge looked at the documents in front of her, then at me and Marcus, then back at the HOA's lawyer. Here's what's going to happen. The HOA will immediately remove the lien. The HOA will rescind all fines issued to Mr. Harrison. The HOA will issue a written apology and a written acknowledgement that the trees in question are on Mr. Harrison's property, and that he has no obligation to remove them. And the HOA will pay Mr. Harrison's attorney's fees and costs. Your Honor, the amount of attorney's fees should have been considered before your client decided to engage in this harassment campaign, Judge Torres interrupted. The fees are reasonable, and they're a natural consequence of the HOA's actions. Is there anything else? Robert Paulson shook his head. He looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Mr. Harrison, did you want to pursue the personal claims against Miss Patterson? The judge asked. I glanced at Marcus, who gave me a small nod. We had discussed this. Not at this time, Your Honor. If the HOA complies with your order, I'm willing to dismiss those claims without prejudice. Very well. The HOA has 14 days to comply with this order. This case is continued to December 20th for a compliance hearing. We're adjourned. As we left the courtroom, Robert Paulson approached us. I want you to know that I advised against this entire course of action. Miss Patterson insisted and the other board members didn't push back. I'm glad it's over. It's not quite over, Marcus said. We still need to see compliance. You'll have it. I've already drafted the documents. They'll be filed by the end of the week. He was true to his word. By Friday, the lien had been removed from my property, and I received a formal letter from the HOA. It stated that all fines had been rescinded, acknowledged that the oak trees were entirely on my property and subject to state protection, and apologized for the improper enforcement action. It was signed by all 3 board members, though I noticed Sandra's signature looked shaky and reluctant. The special election happened the following week. Sandra, Bethany, and Carol all declined to run for re-election. A new board was elected, consisting of James Martinez as president, Patricia Wung as vice president, and David Henderson as treasurer. One of their first acts was to hire a new property management company to handle HOA administration, and to ensure that all enforcement actions went through proper procedures. I thought that would be the end of it, But Sandra wasn't quite done yet. 2 weeks after the election, I came home from work to find that someone had spray-painted "Tree Killer" across my garage door in bright red letters. My security cameras caught the whole thing. It was Sandra, dressed in dark clothing, vandalizing my property at 2 in the morning. I called the police and provided them with the video footage. Sandra was arrested and charged with vandalism and trespassing. When the police searched her phone as part of the investigation, they found something more disturbing: a series of text messages to a tree service company, trying to hire them to come onto my property and cut down the oaks while I was at work. Fortunately, the tree service had refused, recognizing that cutting down heritage oaks without proper permits was illegal and could cost them their license. But the intent was clear. Sandra had been planning to destroy my trees illegally. The district attorney added attempted criminal mischief to the charges. Because the value of heritage oaks can run into tens of thousands of dollars per tree, and I had 7 mature oaks on my property, the potential damage would have been well over $100,000. That made it a felony. Sandra's husband, a mild-mannered accountant named Gerald, who I had only seen a handful of times, filed for divorce 2 days after her arrest. Several neighbors later told me that he had been miserable for years, dealing with Sandra's increasingly erratic and controlling behavior, and the arrest was the final straw. The criminal case moved slowly through the system, as these things do. Sandra initially tried to fight the charges, claiming that the video footage was fake and that I had framed her out of revenge. That argument fell apart when the police confirmed that the metadata on the video files showed they hadn't been altered, and when Sandra's own phone records placed her in the location of my house at the exact time the vandalism occurred. In March, Sandra pleaded guilty to vandalism and attempted criminal mischief as part of a plea deal. She was sentenced to 2 years of probation, 120 hours of community service, and was ordered to pay restitution for the damage to my garage door and for the cost of having my security system analyzed as evidence. She was also ordered to stay at least 500 feet away from my property at all times. The last part of the court order created a problem for Sandra because her house was only about 150 feet from mine. She was essentially barred from her own home. She ended up selling the house and moving to Arizona, where I hoped she would bother someone else instead of me, though I kind of felt sorry for her future neighbors. The new owners of Sandra's former house were a young couple named Derek and Melissa Thompson with 2 small kids. When they moved in that summer, I went over to introduce myself and to warn them about the leaf situation in the fall. "Oh, we love the trees," Melissa said enthusiastically. "They provide such great shade, and the kids are excited about jumping in leaf piles this autumn." We were worried the yard would be too sunny. "You don't mind raking?" I asked, almost afraid to believe my good fortune. "Are you kidding? We have a mulching mower. We'll just mulch them into the lawn. Free fertilizer," Derek said with a grin. "Plus, our kids are going to be old enough to help with raking this year. It'll be a good chore for them." I could have hugged them both. The new HOA board turned out to be remarkably reasonable. They focused on actual issues like maintaining the community pool and clubhouse, organizing neighborhood events, and handling legitimate property maintenance problems. They revised the enforcement procedures to ensure that everything went through proper channels, and that homeowners had clear notice and opportunity to respond before any fines were issued. James Martinez, the new president, became a good friend. We started having coffee together on Saturday mornings, sitting on my porch and enjoying the view of the oak trees. He told me that Sandra had left the HOA finances in disarray, with thousands of dollars unaccounted for and records that made no sense. "We've hired a forensic accountant," he said one morning in late April. "It looks like Sandra might have been using HOA funds for personal expenses. Nothing huge, but lots of little things. Dinners charged to the HOA credit card that weren't board meetings. Gas for her car claimed as HOA business when she was running personal errands. That kind of thing." "Are you going to pursue it?" I asked. "We're required to report it to the DA's office because she was a fiduciary for the HOA. But honestly, we just want to move on. We've tightened up the financial controls so it can't happen again, and we're focused on rebuilding trust with the homeowners." The forensic audit did get reported to the district attorney, who added embezzlement charges to Sandra's growing list of legal problems. She ended up pleading guilty to those as well, and her probation was extended and the restitution increased. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had to declare bankruptcy because of all the legal fees and restitution payments. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. But then I remembered the months of harassment, the illegal lien on my property, the vandalism, and the attempted destruction of trees that had stood for longer than she had been alive. Sandra had made her choices, and she had to live with the consequences. That fall, when the oak trees began dropping their leaves again, I organized a neighborhood leaf raking party. About 20 families showed up, and we spent a Saturday afternoon raking leaves from yards throughout the neighborhood. The kids jumped in the leaf piles. The adults chatted and got to know each other better, and we filled dozens of yard waste bags that the city picked up for free during the fall collection season. Derek and Melissa's kids were in heaven, diving into the biggest leaf pile I had ever seen, their laughter ringing out through the crisp autumn air. Several neighbors brought snacks and drinks, and the event turned into an impromptu block party that lasted until sunset. "We should make this an annual tradition," Patricia Wung suggested as she helped me bag up the last of the leaves from my front yard. "It brings everyone together, and it gets the work done faster." "I think that's a great idea," I agreed. "We could do it every October, make a whole day of it." The tradition stuck. Every October after that, Riverside Estates held its annual Leaf Fest, as it came to be known. It became one of the most popular neighborhood events, with families coming together to help each other with yard work and to enjoy the beautiful fall weather. Some people brought leaf blowers, others brought rakes, and everyone brought a good attitude. The oak trees continued to stand tall and proud, their branches spreading wide over my property and shading the neighborhood. In the spring, they put out fresh green leaves and provided homes for countless birds and squirrels. In the summer, they offered relief from the Sacramento heat. In the fall, they turned golden and dropped their leaves in a natural cycle that had been happening for decades before any houses were built here, and would continue for decades after we were all gone. I never did end up cutting them down, obviously. In fact, I worked with a certified arborist to ensure they stayed healthy and well maintained. I had them professionally trimmed every few years to remove any dead branches and to keep them from interfering with power lines or structures. I had the arborist teach me how to identify signs of disease or pest problems so I could catch any issues early. Those trees became one of my favorite things about my home. I spent countless evenings sitting in their shade, reading or just enjoying the peace and quiet. I hung a hammock between two of them and spent lazy Sunday afternoons napping in the dappled sunlight that filtered through the leaves. Marcus and I stayed in touch, and he loved to tell the story of Sandra and the oak trees at legal conferences and bar association meetings. It became a cautionary tale about HOA overreach and the importance of understanding property rights. He even wrote an article about it for a legal journal, changing the names to protect privacy, but keeping the essential facts of the case. "This is the kind of thing they should teach in law school," he told me over lunch one day, about 2 years after the whole mess had started. "Property rights, environmental law, HOA governance, criminal consequences of civil disputes. It's got everything." "I'm just glad it's over," I said. Though I have to admit, it made for some interesting stories. "You handled it perfectly," Marcus said. "You knew your rights, you documented everything, and you didn't back down when you were in the right. A lot of people would have just caved to the pressure or moved away." "I'm stubborn," I admitted. "And I hate bullies. Sandra thought she could push me around because that's what had always worked for her before. She picked the wrong person this time." The legal fees that the HOA had been ordered to pay me covered Marcus's costs and then some. I used the extra money to have a professional landscape designer create a plan for my property that incorporated the oak trees as focal points. We added native California plants that thrived in the shade and required minimal water, creating a beautiful, sustainable landscape that was the envy of the neighborhood. I also used some of the money to install a small bronze plaque near the largest of the oak trees. It read, "Heritage Oak, estimated age 85 years, protected under California law, may it stand for 85 more." I didn't do it to be petty or to rub salt in anyone's wounds. I did it because I genuinely loved those trees and wanted to honor them. The Thompsons turned out to be wonderful neighbors. Their kids grew up playing in the shade of the oaks, climbing the lower branches with their parents' supervision, and learning about nature and the environment. Derek built his kids a treehouse in one of the oaks that was technically on his property, though its branches spread over from my side of the property line. He asked my permission first, and I was happy to give it. The treehouse was beautifully constructed and didn't damage the tree at all. I never saw Sandra again after she moved to Arizona. I heard occasional updates through mutual acquaintances. She apparently got a job working in retail, which I imagined was quite a come-down for someone who had been used to wielding power over an entire neighborhood. Her divorce was finalized, and her ex-husband Gerald remarried a couple of years later to a woman who, by all accounts, was kind and reasonable. As for me, I settled into life in Riverside Estates and became an active member of the community. I served on the HOA board for a couple of terms, helping to ensure that the governance reforms James and the others had implemented stayed in place. I made genuine friends with my neighbors, attended community events, and felt like I had found a real home. The whole experience taught me several valuable lessons. First, know your rights and don't be afraid to stand up for them. Second, documentation is everything when you're in a dispute. Third, sometimes the person who seems to have all the power is actually on very shaky legal ground. And fourth, a community is only as good as the people who are willing to invest time and energy into making it better. Those oak trees, the ones that Sandra had been so desperate to destroy, became a symbol for the neighborhood. They represented stability, longevity, and the idea that some things are worth protecting even when it would be easier to just tear them down and start over. They reminded us that we were part of something bigger than ourselves, part of a natural cycle that had been going on long before we arrived and would continue long after we were gone. On warm summer evenings, I sometimes stood in my backyard and looked up at the branches spreading overhead, listening to the rustle of leaves and the chirping of birds settling in for the night. I thought about how close I had come to losing this, how Sandra's unreasonable demands and abuse of power could have forced me into a position where fighting back seemed impossible or too expensive or too time-consuming. But I had fought back and I had won. not just for myself, but for everyone in Riverside Estates who had been bullied or intimidated by an HOA president who forgot that she was supposed to serve the community, not rule over it. The trees stood as living proof that doing the right thing, even when it's difficult, is worth it in the end. Years later, I'm still in the same house, still enjoying the shade of those magnificent oaks. The neighborhood has continued to thrive under reasonable HOA leadership. Property values have increased, not because of strict enforcement of petty rules, but because people actually want to live in a community where neighbors support each other, and common sense prevails over arbitrary authority. And every autumn, when the leaves begin to fall and Leaf Fest comes around again, I'm reminded of how something that seemed like such a huge problem to one person turned out to be an opportunity for an entire community to come together. The leaves that Sandra saw as a nuisance became the catalyst for one of our best neighborhood traditions, bringing families together and creating memories that will last far longer than any HOA dispute. The oak trees continue to stand, solid and enduring, their roots running deep into the California soil, their branches reaching toward the sky. They were here before Sandra, they're here after Sandra, and they'll be here long after all of us are gone. And that, I think, is exactly how it should be.